Today I'm going to demonstrate a few techniques that you might want to use either in accompaniment to your drawing for your final drawing project for our line unit, or you might want to use just when we do watercolor painting later on. So to start, you all have a strip of paper or a chunk of watercolor, and you should divide it into 12 parts and label them with the headings: wash, glaze, pickup, negative painting, saran wrap, oil pastel, crayon resist, masking tape, leading, salt, dry brush, splatter, and blot or sponge. And I've included this list in your Google, the shared folder, so that you don't forget which ones to have. And I'll take a picture of the finished product as well. So to start with, we're going to try out a glaze. And as probably most of you know, the first thing to know about watercolors is that for them to work, you have to get them juicy. You have to get them wet. So I'm going to take my watercolors here, whatever color I'm working with, and add a little bit of water to it so that it's ready to go. Okay. A wash is really great for like a background, or if you want to use, you just want a light color somewhere. And how you do a wash is very simple. You just get some water and you put it on your paper first. And then you get your watercolors pretty wet and juicy, so they're pretty liquidy. And then with that wet on wet, you just drop a little watercolor on your page, and then you can spread it out with your brush. So it's just like a light background color, light painting of a color with wet, so that you don't see any lines. Okay, so that's a wash. The next one we're going to be doing is a glaze. And to do a glaze, we're going to have to let part of it dry for a little bit. So that's why I put it next. So I'm going to pick a different color, get my watercolor juicy, and I'm going to start with a wash on this one too. So a little water first. Actually, I'm going to use orange. Okay, and then nice and wet to make the wash again. And then for the glaze, we have to leave this one to dry for a little bit. So after you've done a layer of wash on your glaze, you can move on. Same thing's going to happen to pickup here. Okay, we're going to start with a wash, and then after that, we will come back to it to show you the next step. So it doesn't matter what color, pick a color you want to use. Okay, pickup is just like a way to erase when you are painting with watercolor. Okay, a big part of watercolor painting is being really patient, and that's what makes it kind of difficult for a lot of people. It's what makes it difficult for me, because I like to move quickly. So here I'm painting my wash. Now imagine I messed up in some way, like it didn't turn out the way I wanted. What I can do is get my brush, well, now that it's still wet, I can just take my brush, dry it off, and go to a spot and kind of move my brush in there to remove some of the color. So it's like I'm erasing. Okay, so while it's still wet, you want your brush to be dried out. So I kind of wring it out in my hand, and then I come in and pick up some of the wet, kind of like if you were using a sponge. All right, so you're sponging up the color. Okay, but you can also do pick up after it dries, which we'll come back to. Okay. The next thing is another one that's going to take multiple steps, and that is negative painting. And negative painting is kind of just a way to create depth, and instead of painting in the positive space, or what you would normally paint in. So like if I was painting a tree, instead of painting the inside, I'm going to paint around it. So here's my tree I'm drawing, and this tree is close to me, and then I have another tree that's a little bit further away, and then another tree that's a little bit further away. Negative painting can help me make this tree seem closer, and then further away, and so on. So what you do is, instead of painting inside the tree, I'm going to paint around it. So I'm going to take, and that's kind of like a wash, so nice wet on wet. I'm going to make my trees purplish. Okay, I'm just going to go right around the outside here of my first tree. What is he eating? And then pull away over the other two. Okay, and if you look around in the room, you might be able to, oops, bled into another one. You might be able to see some of these up in the room that they're doing in painting class, negative painting, some examples of these. Okay, so that's step one, just painting around the first layer, the thing closest to you, and over the next two layers, and then we'll come back to that. Okay, number 5 here is saran wrap. Okay, I'm going to paint however I want, juicy, unjuicy, lots of colors. It's got to be kind of wet at least. So I'm putting lots of colors on here, and I'm making it wet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a little chunk of saran wrap. Oops. And I'm going to sort of like crumple it up a little bit and lay it on top of here. And then I got to leave it on there until it dries. So you're just leaving that. And what it will do is it'll create an interesting effect and like texture in the watercolor when it dries. So just crumple up a little bit of saran wrap, stick it right on top of your wet watercolor, and then leave it there. Okay. The next technique is the oil pastel or crayon resist. You can do this with anything that resists water. So crayon, the wax resists water. Oil pastel, the oil resists water. So I'm going to just draw something first with my crayon or oil pastel. Whatever you want to make. And then take the watercolor and paint over top, and you can see that the crayon pushes it away. That wax from the crayon or oil pastel will push away and leave your design showing. So that might be interesting, like if you did a blind contour drawing of someone, or just a line drawing of somebody with white crayon or oil pastel, or it could be black, either way, whatever color. And then adding watercolor on top, it'll push it away, and you'll have color in your negative space, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so these are all very simple. Next is masking tape. All right. With masking tape, it's the same or a similar idea to that resist. We're just going to lay down some chunks of masking tape. I have painter's tape here, but masking tape works good too. And then paint over top and let it dry. And then it will leave those spaces white. So. Okay, let's go on to leading. Okay, so one of the biggest problems people encounter when they're painting with watercolors is that they'll be painting two different areas, and in one area they'll have painted and then they'll try and paint the next area right next to it, and what's going to happen is you can see that the colors will bleed into each other. Okay, so you have to be patient with watercolors. If you're not patient, the colors will bleed in and your lines will get blurred. It's also sometimes frustrating for people to try and paint inside like an intricate design to try and get their watercolor to stay within that design. One way that is easy to control watercolor is by doing what I call leading. I'm not exactly sure if that's the right name for it, but I call it leading. And what you do is you use the water to your advantage. So if this is the line I want to stay in or follow here, what I can do before I add paint is just take a little bit of water and right next to the line draw a line of water. So I know that's kind of hard for you to see, but then if I go and grab my paint and I drop it in there, it will follow that line. So it kind of just snakes along the line real easily. And then you can take your brush and pull it into the space you wanted it to go. Okay, so I could continue on going just with my water inside that line, kind of like drawing with a pencil, and then take my color and kind of plop it in there, and it will follow that line for me, and then pull it away. So that's an easy way to get nice clean lines with your watercolor. It's also an easy way to fill in a space and make sure you're going right up to the edge. Now, just like I said before though, if I wanted to do this other side, I'd have to be patient and wait for it to dry before I go back. Otherwise it would bleed. Okay. The next one is salt. Again, you can just throw some paint on your page here. Get kind of liquidy. And then take a little bit of your iodized salt, whatever kind of salt you got. Oops, that's a lot. And you just sprinkle it. And this is another one where you have to wait for it to dry. Otherwise the effect won't be there. But the salt is, again, just like with the resist kind of, it pushes the water away. It creates kind of like little starbursts in the watercolor.
Just put it on the table.
Okay, thanks. Alright, next is dry brush. So sometimes you want to create like textures like grass, or you want it to just not look so liquidy with your watercolor. You want to have a little bit more control. And in that case, I like to wring out my watercolor brush. You could do it on a paper towel. I always just use my hands. And then you get your watercolor from your palette here, and you want it to be like a little bit less watery than normal. Okay, and then you're just painting, and you can see it looks a little bit more dry. It's kind of like painting with your watercolor until it dries out of your brush. Now, one thing though, even when it gets dry like this, like sometimes you might get a dry brush effect on accident because you aren't adding enough water or paint to your brush, and that's not really what you wanted. It's important, if that's not what you want, that you just know you go back for more water or more paint. Okay? You should never be scrubbing with your brush like this because it makes it nasty and tangly. So just kind of pulling with your brush in different directions. Alright, the next one is splatter paint. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit wetter watercolor here, and I'm just going to flick my bristles here. Oop, this one's not very good for. Okay, so I'm flicking onto the paper, and you can see they're pretty small looking. Alright, and you could use a bigger brush and maybe get a bigger effect. Then if you go and you get your brush a little bit more wet, they'll be a little bit bigger. Okay, if you put water on your paper first, and then splatter on top of it, then you can get even bigger and more diluted looking spots. Okay, so different effects depending on how much water you're using when you splatter. Okay, and then the next one here is the blot or sponge, and again you just put down some paint. You can do wet on wet or just regular, and then take a little piece of paper towel or a sponge, and then just going to take this little crunched up piece of paper towel and just kind of stamp it on there, and it creates a little bit different texture. Okay, so we had a few that we started and we didn't finish. So if we go back up to glaze, we have the orange there, and all a glaze is kind of putting a thin layer of another color over top of the color before. So I did orange, And now I'm going to take some red, and I'm going to kind of dilute the red with more water. And I'm going to put some water down on the painting I did below. Make sure my red is really kind of wet and thin. I'm going to spread it out on top. And what's nice about a glaze is you're painting the color on top, but you get a little bit more richness because it's kind of like you can see both. Since the top layer is translucent, it's kind of like you can see both colors. So you can kind of create a more rich color effect there. It will look a little less flat. Okay? And we also had pickup here. This is pretty dry now, and I showed you how when it's wet you want a dry brush to soak it up and sponge it up. But when it's pretty dry, or it is dry, what you can do is put some water on top where you want to erase, then dry out your brush and go sponge it up, and it will help erase it. It might not be perfect, but it will remove a lot of the color. So if you accidentally bleed into an area you don't want paint to be, adding a little water and then going and soaking it back up can remove some of that pigment and make it look more white again, like your paper. You see that okay? Okay. Okay, and then the negative painting, we did one step. We went around one tree here. Now the next step is to go around, paint the negative space, so not the inside, but the outside of the second layer. So my second tree here, I'm going to paint just like before. I'm going to kind of lead it around the second layer, but also not covering the first layer. So painting only over that third tree and the space around. So not painting the first tree, just the space around it, not painting the second tree, just the space around it, and right over top of that third tree. Oops, I gotta move that saran wrap. Okay, and then I would wait for that to dry. And then the last thing would be to paint around that third tree, making sure not to cover any of the previous layers before. So I don't know if it'll work or not. I'll try and do it with red here. Actually, I'll go with blue, make it darker. So again, I'm going to paint around the third tree. This would be the last layer. And I avoid the second tree and the first tree. So you're not painting inside of any of the trees here. You're only painting the space around them. And you would wait normally in between for each step so that it dries. But as you can see then, you have a change in value from really light to darker and darker as you go, and it can help create the illusion of depth for you. Okay. So then I'm kind of all finished here with the 12 steps, or the 12 practice examples. You can play around with the watercolor paint on scrap paper if you want. Try painting some more things, but this can go on the drying rack until tomorrow. The saran wrap here, we can try picking it up. I don't know if it'll be ready yet, but oh yeah, it's only showing a little bit. I should have stuck it down a little harder and waited a little longer, but it should have some white spaces and designs inside, but it does create a different texture. And then the masking tape, this is still really wet, so I don't know how well it'll show up or how well it will have created nice white lines, but you can see when you pull it up, then you have some nice white clean spaces. Okay, and then the salt you've got to wait on. I would wait on the saran wrap too until it's completely dry. But so we're all finished here. This goes on the drying rack. It's 20 points, so you want to finish it. Make sure your name is on it. And I'll collect them when I'm back tomorrow. Okay, this video is on your student drive folder that I've shared with you, as will be a picture of the finished product here, and instructions or the 12 categories you need to do as well. Thanks a lot. Happy Monday.